as amended?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Whedon. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Vice President Williams. The motion being properly moved and seconded, I ask for the ayes and nays. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is approved. Next on our agenda is approval of minutes from our July 27th, 2016 working session. Are there corrections or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Vice President Williams. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Wilson-Phelan. The motion being properly moved and seconded, I'll ask the yeas and nays. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion's approved. I should have done these together. We have the minutes from our September 7th working session as well. Any corrections or additions to those minutes from September 7th? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Wilson-Phelan, a second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Lord. No, I'm sorry.
Ms. Anderson.
Ms. Anderson. The motion being properly moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion's approved. Good evening. My name is Jack Jacobson, and I am President and Ward 2 representative of the State Board of Education. On behalf of the members of the District of Columbia State Board of Education, I want to welcome our guests and our viewing public to our Wednesday, September 21st, 2016 public meeting. The State Board holds its regularly scheduled meetings on the third Wednesday of every month in the old council chambers here at 441 4th Street Northwest. The members of the State Board of Education welcome your participation and your support in our efforts to improve education in the nation's capital. The State Board of Education's work to create a new school accountability system continues on pace with our partners at OSSE. Tonight, we are joined by national experts who will help inform the State Board and the residents of the district on the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. The State Board and Office of State Superintendent of Education have been working closely since passage of ESSA in December 2015 on the development of an accountability system that incorporates input from parents, students, teachers, and policy leaders. We've held meetings across the district and are planning to hold additional meetings throughout the fall. If you are interested in learning more about ESSA and its potential for district students, please visit our website at sboe.dc.gov/ESSA, ESSA. There you will find an online survey in English, Spanish, and Amharic to offer your thoughts on what makes a school successful at fostering student learning. I also want to thank Superintendent Kang and her team for their commitment to the community involvement in this process. They've been excellent partners, and we look forward to continuing our work together. The State Board is also incredibly interested in student participation in our work. And as such, we're going to be continuing our Student Advisory Committee, which is made up of students from the top 5 largest DC public charter schools, DC traditional DC public schools, and 5 at-large seats. If you are a student in the District of Columbia and would like to participate in the Student Advisory Committee, please email us at sboe.dc.gov for more information. And our website, it's under Student Voices, I believe. Usually at this time, the State Superintendent of Education, Hansel Kang, would give her opening remarks, but Ms. Kang is currently enjoying a well-deserved vacation. We wish her a fantastic and safe trip. We'll continue our meeting with public witnesses. The State Board welcomes public participation in activities under our authority. At every public meeting, we begin with testimony from public witnesses on education-related matters. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak at a future public meeting, please contact our staff at sboe@dc.gov or by calling 202-741-0888. Our public witnesses today, I've seen Ms. Marilyn Holmes, Executive Director of Total Sunshine, Inc. You can come down to the desk. And is Carol Stewart, a Ward 7 resident, here?
Mr. President, Ms. Stewart indicated about 10 minutes ago that she would be submitting written testimony.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask our staff to make sure that that gets circulated to the full board once it's received. Ms. Holmes, you have 3 minutes.
All righty. Well, good evening.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here once again. I'm Marilyn Holmes. I'm the president and founder and executive director, the driving force behind Total Sunshine, Inc. We're a nonprofit in the city, and we have been working to help our young people that are on the right track stay there, and we have been helping the ones, or so we hope, we've been helping the ones that are not on the right track to get onto the right track. This past June was such a wonderful, we had a great event. We honored the valedictorians and salutatorians of the city, the top graduates. I'm sure everyone's familiar that I always come in and talk about our annual rewards ceremony. This year was our 8th annual, and it's so important to make sure that we provide our young people who have done the hard work their entire school career, essentially. And so we try to make sure we support them and reward them with technological tools for college. This year was yet another year that we were able to do that. Here's actually a picture of one of our top grads graduating classes. Every year is generally about 70 students that we have to support, and it's quite something else to get them supported. This year I did a whole lot of outreach, and I'll tell you I was disappointed, but I ended up giving the largest financial contribution myself to make sure the young people were supported. I'm all in with this. This is 16 years for me as the Medic 2 Society. I started this thing as a paramedic, just realizing that we needed more help in the city from young people and with young people. And so it's totally fine for me to do that, but I do hope that there are other people out there that will help us to support the young people that have done the right thing for their entire school career. Now, this ceremony that we have every year is a part of our school grade incentive program. Oh my goodness, we do great things with that program. We've done so many anti-violence, life coping skills seminars in schools. We have, of course, the main signature event is the annual ceremony, and then we all televise it all. I'm sure you all can see I got my people over there. We're going to put this on our show. It comes on DCTV. We won some great awards on DCTV for being best youth focus, best community focus, and we're looking to continue. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Oh, well, our school grade incentive program, we're actually we're launching a new avenue of support for young people. Of course, we are living in really troubling times. I'm sure if you turn on the news, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It's just crazy out here. And so I tell you, we need as many people on the front lines to work with these young people as possible. And so I'm for it. The Medic 2 Society is on duty. I'm going to go ahead and work with my board. We've already kind of hammered out some of the details, but we're looking to do some new engagements with our school grade incentive program with young people in the city. Ward 8 is going to be our focus. To start. Hopefully we can get enough support to take these endeavors that we're working on citywide. I'm looking to have more one-to-one communications with some of the young people, hopefully kind of teach them how to act without them knowing that they're being taught. Sometimes the best way to teach a young person is to not let them know they're being taught. And so I'm really excited about some of these new things we're having to come down the line. And so, you have to excuse me, I'm out of breath. I'm sure you guys saw me just running here, but it's so important for me every time to make sure that I come out here and let you know that Total Sunshine, I'm on the job. And young people out there, don't be discouraged. There's someone out there that cares. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And I'll tell you, if someone wants to know more information about our school grade incentive program, they can go to totalsunshine.org, or, well, that's actually the best place to find us. Or they can call us on the Sunshine Line. It's 202-575-0462. And we're looking forward to a fantastic school grade reward ceremony, 9th annual, next June 22nd, 2017. Once again, we'll be looking to support the valedictorians and the salutatorians. I've said that so many times, but we're going to be supporting them once again. It's going to be roughly 70 students, all public school students, all charter school students, the top 2 from each single school, every single ward. Yes, we're going to be there. We're going to support them at our event. And I love it. Thanks so much for this opportunity to express these things about our support for young people. Total Sunshine Incorporated is on the job, as I am as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes, and thank you for your dedication to DC students.
Yes, all good. Thank you. Okay.
Tonight, the State Board of Education will consider 2 resolutions related to its budget. Until recently, the 3 offices of the State Board have not utilized a budget that reflects actual activities performed by the staff and members. Today, we are taking a step to make the budget of the State Board more transparent and allow for greater oversight. Members, we have before us 2 resolutions. I would like to consider the resolution entitled SR 16-5, DC State Board of Education Fiscal Year 2017 Budget Resolution first.
I'd like to make a motion to table this resolution and the next one.
Second.
There has been a motion by Ms. Wilson-Phelan and a second by Ms. Lord to table discussion on this issue.
Discussion?
Discussion. Ms. Wilson-Phelan.
Yes, I just want to explain the logic behind my thinking here. While I appreciate that we have had 2 working sessions discussing this, and I definitely appreciate the transparency initiative and the preparatory work our staff has done to get us to this point. I know there are some unresolved issues that will be affecting our budget, and I know that later on Ms. Wattenberg will actually be suggesting a committee to delve more deeply into these issues so that we can be very, very clear and aligned as a board about how our budget will be allocated. So I would suggest we table this until we have more clarity, but that it be resolved within the next 3 weeks.
Additional discussion. Ms. Lord.
I support Ms. Wilson-Phelan on this. There are some unresolved issues, and I would much rather have them resolved and everybody on board than to have to dive into the particulars in the form of a resolution.
All right. Any further discussion? If not, I'd ask our executive director to call the roll on the motion to table both resolutions.
Mr. Jacobson.
Nay.
Ms. Williams. Ms. Lord.
Yay.
Ms. Wilson-Phelan.
Yes.
Ms. Wattenberg. Ms. Anderson. Mr. Jones. Mr. Whedon.
Yes.
Ms. Jolly. Ms. Jolly. Mr. President, the motion passes.
Thanks so much. Therefore, these resolutions will be tabled to our next public meeting. We will now then move to our discussion of PARCC results from school year 15-16. The district recently received the results from the second year of the PARCC exams. PARCC is a consortium of states that work together to develop high-quality common assessments in math and English that helps us ensure that students are on track for college and careers. In late August, OSSE released results from the 2015-16 school year. These scores showed modest growth overall from the first year of the exam, but when you examine the details, had significant room for improvement. Tonight, we are joined by Shauna Young, OSSE Chief of Staff, and Danielle Branson, Director of Assessments, to discuss these results. Ms. Branson, I understand you're fairly new.
Yes, 5
Great.
weeks.
We appreciate you spending your time with us tonight.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us tonight for this discussion. The State Board is committed, as you are, to making sure that the growth we are seeing continues. Who'd like to begin?
I will.
Ms. Branson?
Good evening.
We're not going to put a time limit on your presentation, but if you could keep it under 10 minutes, that'd be great.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name again is Danielle Branson. I'm the new Director of Assessment for the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, and I'm here today to present to you the statewide results for the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers Assessments for 2016. And we do have a slide deck for everyone to look along with. I want to start by reaffirming that PARCC is a high-quality assessment that is important for DC because it truly measures the real-world skills like critical thinking, problem-solving, modeling, writing to text that our students need to succeed in college and careers. It provides us with actionable information we need to both support and challenge our students. It's important to note that in the spring 2016 administration, 99% of our students took the assessments online, which is up from 92% in spring of 2015. In this presentation, I'll be sharing the results for the PARCC assessments at the state level, which includes our results for DCPS and our public charter schools. So when I say that the PARCC assessments ask our students to use critical thinking and the skills that they'll need in the real world, this is a real example of how we can see how this is operationalized in our assessments. You can see on this slide 2 sample assessment items from the DC CAS and from PARCC for 6th grade math and ELA. And if you look at the left side of the screen for the math items, you can see that the underlying standard is quite similar. But if we look at the DC CAS question in blue at the bottom of the screen, you can see that students simply need to solve the equation and select their answer. In the PARCC item, however, students are asked to look at 2 different ways they can solve the problem, one through a diagram and one through written expression, and describe how they relate to each other and how they are connected. And you can see here that this allows our students to show a deeper understanding of fractions, divisions, and how to solve complex problems. If we look at the ELA side, again, DC CAS at the bottom and PARCC at the top, you can see in DC CAS, a student is asked to explain how the poet's words show how the speaker feels about rain and use supporting details. While in the PARCC item in 6th grade, students are asked to read 2 texts. They're asked to synthesize and reflect on the text and write an essay that compares the two and contrasts. And is important to note, it looks at using supporting details and evidence to support their claim. This is the type of rigor and depth of understanding the standards call for, and it's the type of engagement with a text we see students using every single day in their classrooms. So I think that foundation is really important as we talk about the results. So let's dive into the results for 2016. A couple key takeaways. Scores are up for 2015. We saw gains across almost all of our grades and subjects. It is particularly exciting to see that there have been strong results in early grades math for the 2nd year in a row. And we see this as an encouragement for what's to come in the future. We have also seen the specific groups of students have improved across grades and content. We've also been able to release a wide variety of resources and supports to ensure that parents, educators, the community, and students have the tools they need to interpret and then take action on these results. So to give some framing, the PARCC assessment has 5 performance levels ranging from level 1, did not yet meet expectations, to level 5, exceeded expectations. On the left side of the screen, you can see that levels 4 and 5 are the indicator of what we call on track. So either on track for the next grade level or on track to leave high school, college, and career ready. So in the next couple slides, when we talk about being on track, that's what we're referring to, levels 4 and above. And with respect to these performance levels, we have some early research showing that PARCC is really living up to its promise when it comes to predicting readiness. There's a study that Mathematica released that stated that the results we see are predictive of how students will do in their first year of college, particularly in entry-level credit-bearing coursework. More to come, but that's particularly exciting. So when we look about our overall results, you can see this is broken down by performance level. From 2015 to 2016, we did see a 2 percentage point increase in our on-track levels 4 and 5 in ELA, and 3 percentage point increase in mathematics. And you can also see in ELA, something we are interested in, is the fact that the level 1 students, our lowest performance level, we're seeing that number decrease. And that is equally as important as we're thinking about the change in progress over time. So moving into our ELA results by test, you can see here that we saw increases across almost every grade level here, with the exception of the ELA 2 assessment. Again, we were encouraged to see that the level 1 students at our lowest level did decrease from 2015 to 2016 here. I'm just giving a second for you to take a look at the increases from 2015 at the bottom to 2016. When we look at by grade, here's where you can really see the difference, ranging from a 1-point increase in grade 3 to a 4-point increase in grade 8, with a decrease again at the ELA 2 level. Looking at mathematics, again, you can see that we saw gains across most of our subject areas, our courses. There were some areas of decrease, of course, in grade 8. We can see some consistent in grade 6. Something to note is that you're seeing more boxes here in mathematics, and that is due to the fact that we have some students in grade 7 and 8 who are enrolled in Algebra 1. We also have some students who took the geometry test while they were in middle school last year, so they took the Algebra 2 assessment this year as a required test. So just some framing there for your reference. Again, looking at the early grades here, we saw particularly strong grades in early mathematics for the 2nd year in a row. Last year, we were excited to see higher achievement levels in these grades, and we are particularly excited to see that these grades are seeing greater gains. This is something we are interested in looking at in the future. When we look at the middle grades, when we look for students who are enrolled in 7th grade, a 3-point gain. Those enrolled in 8th grade, we did see a slight decline. But looking at our students enrolled in 9th through 12th grade, a 4-point increase. The solid bar at the bottom, you're seeing some solid and shaded differences here. The solid bar at the bottom reflects those students in 7th or 8th grade who took that test that they were enrolled in that grade level, where the shaded bar reflects those 7th and 8th graders who took an assessment at an advanced level that was not necessarily their enrolled grade. And we talked about that in the other slide as well. One thing we looked at was our specific groups of students, and we were excited to see that there was gains across the vast majority of our specific groups of students, including our Black students, Hispanic students, our special education students, English language learners, economically disadvantaged students, and at-risk students in ELA. The only area where we did see a decrease was for our white students. When it comes to looking at our mathematics results, for specific groups, we saw increases across the board. When it comes to looking at participation, which is a federal requirement, DC met or exceeded our 95% participation rate target for both ELA and math at the overall levels. And when you look at specific grades, we met or exceeded our targets in most grades. The exception here was high school, where we did not, but our participation rates did improve from the previous year. We know we have more work to do here, but we also know that given the switch from a grade-based to course-based high school assessment, it's meant that we need to revisit and refine our business rules for calculating participation rate. So it's something we're aware of. So we're excited by the progress we're seeing, but we know we have a lot more work to do to support our students in schools. We're not yet in a place where all of our kids are college and career ready, but every single one of our students can get there and deserves to be on that path. So providing resources and supports is critical. So we wanted to share with you just a couple resources and supports that are currently available. It's an important step to ensure that educators, students, parents, and the community are able to interpret and take action on the data, as we mentioned earlier. So we made some improvements to our public-facing website, which is results.osce.dc.gov, and there are links to that from OSCE's homepage if you're interested. The interactive website shows the data in easy-to-read visual displays, and we have two samples that we're showing on the screen here. On the left, you can see the overall year-to-year look at results. It's available at the state, LEA, and school level. On the right, this is particularly interesting. We not only provide the overall results, but how students did on certain portions of the test. And we think, again, this is particularly useful for educators. So if you're a fifth grade teacher at a school, you can pull up your information and say, okay, how did my students do on literary text, written expression, vocabulary? How does that compare to the state, the LEA? Where are our areas of strength? Where are areas of challenge? So an opportunity to look across in that way can be really helpful instructionally. When it comes to supports for families, families are receiving score reports with their individual child's results. They were sent to schools home earlier in September. This information includes a child's overall score, but also talks about how their child did on different portions of the test, as we just discussed. It also includes information on how the child's performance compares to other children in DC, the school, across the district, as well as their previous performance in other years. And again, this information helps children and parents know the types of questions to ask their teachers to help improve. We do have some additional materials that are live on our website now, including the downloadable detailed school, LEA sector, and state data spreadsheets, the subject-specific spreadsheets, the score report guide and FAQ for families in English and other translated languages, as well as access to the 2015 test items, released items, and about a full-length test form for every course and content area was released last year. There's also access to practice tests and a number of additional resources that we're encouraging people to explore. So in summary, we're seeing progress. We know there's additional work to be done, but this gives a high-level overview of the state-level PARCC assessment results for 2016. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Young, will you be speaking as well?
No.
You're here for questions, I'm guessing.
I'm here available to speak. I have no further presentation. Thank you.
Terrific. Board members, we'll do 5 minutes per round. Mr. Whedon?
Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight and going through this in such detail. I'd have one request. As a parent, we receive the individual reports, and I think it does a great job of capturing where my daughter is versus her class, her school, and the city. I'd also like to know where she's at nationally. Part of the beauty of PARCC is it gives us a benchmark that covers not just our city, but how our kids are doing against their peers across the nation, and I'd love to see that added. I also see somewhat of a disconnect in the data. Can we go back to slide 13? And my colleague from Ward 3 has brought this up a couple of times. But if you look here, 7th grade math, last year, 17% of the students were proficient, college and career ready. This year, that same cohort's now in 8th grade. So there was actually growth there. within those students. And I think we need to find a better way to talk about student growth, because that's the true measure of learning. When I think of my daughter's middle school, Elliott Hine Middle School, she's a sixth grader there, 9.2% were proficient in ELA last year, 1.2% in math. Those numbers are atrocious. But I can tell you that there are students in her class that are reading at a kindergarten level. So the teachers are being penalized because, and the school's reputation is being penalized because those students aren't proficient. We can't expect them to make that much growth in a year. And the results are not indicative of the learning that's going on in that class, in those classrooms, in that school. We're seeing students grow multiple years. So we need to find a way to better measure growth. And I'd like to get your thoughts on how can we better do that on an individual student or cohort basis, not year to year of what a school's proficiency level is.
So a couple reactions. First, on the national comparison level, the PARCC as a consortium does produce a consortium level report. That's something that's being worked on for 2016, and happy to share that when that's available. So that does provide some additional rich information to that point. When it comes to cutting the data in different ways, of course, this is looking at seventh grade as enrolled or by the actual assessment, right? So you're looking at the cohort look, and I hear you in that. I think that's something that we've been at OSSE. Our goal is to provide data that's available for individuals to take a look at in multiple different ways. And I think that's something that is encouraged, and a lot of schools are doing, is taking a look at growth individually at the school level. But I don't know if Shauna from the
Yeah, I would point out also, some of this is available, and it's interesting in terms of what we can present and what schools can access for other types of graphic representation to explain the same thing that you're talking about now. When we provide both publicly on in spreadsheet form and on the school form the breakdown of every level of at each school for subject in year over year, and that's where that was where we would start, I believe, to answer the kind of question you're looking now. How is the growth being shown year over year, not just in the levels 4 and 5, but in reduction and movement of students over the year from the lower levels up the ladder towards proficiency and on-track status. And so one of the things we've heard this from you and from other folks as well is to think about other types of graphic representations we can make available and more easily accessible to the public to show that trend in any given school or grade over time. We show that in some part here, but I understand it's a different type of emphasis that you're talking about.
Right, but the overall, when we think we're in a competitive environment, we're in an environment of choice, and one of the first things that parents, at least in Ward 6, look at is how many students are proficient in a school. And I would argue that's not necessarily the correct indicator. For me and for my family, the choice was, are students learning here? And we need to be able to tell a better story there, because this undermines the ability of schools to recruit students, to keep them engaged. And the result becomes a shuffle. There are students unenrolling from my daughter's school yesterday and moving to a quote-unquote better school. Well, when I talked to the parents at back to school night, I'm not quite sure why they were at back to the school night, but they were. They're talking about, well, it's got better test scores. Well, is that indicative of what your kid's going to learn this year? I would argue no, in that specific case. But we need to find a better way to do this. The last thing, I've got about 4 seconds here. I just wanted to point out that I applaud the growth, but we also need to be realistic here. 3 out of 4 kids in the city aren't reading. You look at Eastern High School, again, the public high school in Ward 6, 17.5% proficient, or college and career ready in English, 1.1 in math. Yet 75-80% of those students are graduating. Are we doing these students a disservice? I'd really love to hear, and hopefully we can come back to, what do we think works to drive test scores, and how do we double down and invest in those strategies? We've heard that time and time again from the deputy mayor throughout the chancellor search. What we're going to double down in what works, but nobody has yet to say what works.
Thank you, Mr. Whedon. Let the record reflect that Ms. Jolly from Ward 8 has joined us. Do additional board members have questions? Ms. Wattenberg from Ward 3.
First of all, congratulations on joining OSSI. We're all delighted to have you.
Thank you.
So let me start by following up just a little bit on what Mr. Whedon said and then raise some other things. I totally share what he has said in terms of the importance of following cohorts so that our parents and our schools and everybody in the community, taxpayers, council, everybody understands where the growth is and that that's not the same as what we're being shown. And second, I'm very sympathetic to your point that there's lots of ways to show the data, and you've chosen one way to show it, and that people can go inside and look at an incredible database and pull together all kinds of other ways to do it. Let me just say, I have tried, and I'm not great at this, but I'm probably better than a lot of people, and I got really nowhere. So what I want to say, and I realize this is what you're working towards, so I am encouraging you to work in this direction, but let me just be very specific. I think thinking about next year, what I would really hope that we could see is a series of reports so that when the leaders of the city get up in front of the press conference, there's not one way of looking at the data that then gets picked up by all the newspapers, by the council, by everybody, as though that's the answer. As you've just said, it's an answer, and depending on what you're looking at, it may or may not be a good way to look at it. So what I would see is that there's multiple reports that report out the data in some different ways so that we could have, it would be very educative, I think, for our newspapers. It would be very educative for people in the schools, for parents, and so on. So that is what I want to say on that. Second, I want to talk a little bit about the bollocksing up that has happened at Wilson and Walls. And I think most people are now aware that there was a big score plummet at Wilson and Walls. And there's a backstory to nobody, I want to say interestingly, nobody thinks that the reason there was a score plummet is because suddenly achievement dropped 15, 20, 25 points. So everybody's trying to figure out kind of who to blame, what happened, but nobody's saying achievement dropped. And I think it's important to note that if we had this kind of score drop somewhere else, and we have in the past, people get fired, schools get reconstituted. So it's really important that we have a way of looking at this data and a way of vetting it so that misleading data doesn't get out there. Now, I want to say a couple things about what happened at Wilson and Walls, and the reason I'm saying it is not to look backwards, but to be very specific about the kinds of issues that we really have to make sure don't happen next time. So, and you alluded to at least one of them in your comments, which I'm really delighted to hear, but let me raise them. So part of the OSSI rules were very clear that students should be taking the PARCC test that corresponds to the course that they're enrolled in. For reasons that I do not understand, and I still do not understand, DCPS did not follow that rule in certain cases. And so what you had at Wilson and Walls was a number of kids being told to take tests in courses that they were not enrolled in. Most prominently, the one that's gotten a lot of attention, but it's not just this one, is 11th and 12th graders who took geometry in 8th grade were asked to take geometry tests as 11th and 12th graders. Now, that makes absolutely no sense. Getting those scores tells you nothing about achievement at Wilson. It really doesn't tell you anything relevant about the achievement of those kids. So why were we testing them? Everybody, starting with OSSI, understood that there was nothing to be gained by testing kids in those classes. OSSI's rules would not have required that. But DCPS did it. A number of people, it was raised with DCPS, it didn't get fixed. People were asked to take these tests that were clearly the wrong tests. One result of that was the whole testing operation lost credibility. So many students who in previous years, you know, high school students in none of our high schools, they don't like taking these tests. There's no stakes attached to it. But people buckle down and they take them. And that has been the case to some extent. And in this year, the credibility of the whole operation was so undermined that many kids just decided not to take them, or in more cases, what really happened is people going in, working on it for a few minutes, and leaving. And the blame has been put on these students. And that's what the headlines in the Washington Post were, is that these students just decided to tank their exams. But I think it's important to understand that it started from this lack of cooperation, lack of solving the problem at the adult level. Jack, can I go
Yeah, I
just
just
one
wanna
more
make
minute
sure-
just to do the
I just want to make sure the
fixes
witness
related
have
to
time
this?
to
That's
respond to your question.
That's
You're
fine.
already over
So
time.
let me put out the fixes, and then I'll leave this comment to that, which is, what I really hope is, one, that you can provide some assurance to all of us that next year the rules will be clear to all the LEAs, including DCPS, so that we don't have this again, number one. Number two, that if something like this were to happen, that there is a place where school officials can go, teachers can go, students can go, I can go, and get this aired and solved, instead of everybody raising it and everybody just watching everybody else blame each other, because that's what happened. OSSI and DCPS blamed each other, and that didn't solve the problem. And there needs to be a place to go for that. So I'll leave it at that. I also want to raise a separate set of issues, which has to do with some technology issues, but I'll leave it at that for now. Okay.
Thank you. So just to affirm the testing requirements, there's a federal requirement, of course, that students test annually in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. And I think the history is important here. Many states test more than once in high school. DC transitioned from the DC CAS, testing a comprehensive assessment in 10th grade, moving to a course-based assessment. And I think that's important when we think about our business rules. So OSSI did release business rules, as you mentioned, that indicated the testing requirements for high school and the required assessments in mathematics in particular. For grades 3 and 8 and the vast majority of high school students, the enrollment decisions are very clear. And however, there are some situations where, as we mentioned with our middle school students who are taking advanced math courses, the decisions are relatively nuanced. So in the coming year, to your point, something we are working on is ensuring that the scenarios and FAQs related to the business rules are incredibly clear. That is important to us. It is on a rarer, kind of more edge case situation, but it's still very important. So in the interest of moving forward, that is something that is important and something that we care about, and it is a priority to move forward with clarifying the business rules that were made available, but making sure everyone truly understands what they look like.
Thanks so much. We'll do another round. Additional board member questions? Ms. Wilson-Phelan from Ward 1.
Thank you both for being here tonight and for the time that you've already put into making sure this data is transparent and available to all. I, for one, really appreciate the ability to download the entire spreadsheet and sort it in the ways that I would like to sort it to better understand, at least from a test perspective, what's going on in Ward 1 schools. And I found that very accessible and usable this year in a way that I could actually do relatively quickly. So I appreciate that and applaud all of the movement and work that OSSI in general is doing to present data in ways that make things more transparent. So thank you for that. I just want to echo some of the comments from my colleague in Ward 6 and 3. I would love to see that growth data, and I would put a tiny additional nuance on it. And I know your databases are improving, and so I don't know how possible this is, but if it is, to give people a really realistic picture of growth in schools, I think you have to add the mobility factor onto it. So what I'm really interested in is which schools are doing the best with different types of populations, right? So if I'm a parent, I would be really interested in understanding how various schools are helping maybe ELL students to perform better. Maybe they have strong programs there. It might lead to a series of questions that would better help me select a school for my child, and also to assess whether I think it's the right fit. And so one of the things that would be really interesting to me, in addition to following cohorts, which I strongly support, is how much of that cohort is still intact, right? So if I quickly go through some of my school's data, I can see some of them have a 20 to 30% improvement in test score results between grades in 3 and 4, but I don't know who from grade 3 is still the same kid in grade 4. And given the level of mobility in this city, that's extraordinarily relevant if we're going to draw any conclusions from that. And then I'm sure you all are really familiar with Raise DC's data analysis and the work that they've done at the high school level. But I think as a consumer, a taxpayer, elected official, and a parent, and a former teacher, that level of data, I hope, is what we strive for, where they actually were able to track school level information about which schools were producing the most growth for students, tracking students year by year. So I would just shout out the work that they're doing, and also appreciate that those things take time to develop, and really value all the work you've already done. And so I don't have a question, it's more of a shout out. And I do just want to say, I do want to shout out Ward 1, which overall had tremendous growth. And I know that's because of the incredible work of the teachers and the principals and the groups that are supporting their work. So go Ward 1 schools.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson-Phelan. Additional questions from board members on the first round? Ms. Lord, our at-large member.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellent questions. Mr. Whedon, of course, asked mine. But I've got plenty of others. First of all, I think we're getting better at the reporting of the data in more user-friendly ways. But I have to say, there's a lot of colors and graphs and charts. It's not particularly user-friendly. So I'm committed to working with you to get maybe a parent panel or some users together to sort of see how it's working. Second of all, how come we don't report science scores? Our students have to take federally mandated science assessments in middle, high school, and in elementary school, and it just seems like it's never a priority.
So it's a good question. So as you know, 2015, 2016 was the first operational year for science, which means it's a slightly longer timeline than future years. So moving toward a more sustainable timeline. In first year of administration, there is the need to do performance level setting. Again, as we saw with PARCC, the extended timeline. So moving toward a more sustainable timeline. So it is not that it's not a priority, it's just that it's in its first year of conception and administration, which means it's on a more extended timeline, but moving toward a more sustainable timeline in the future. So when we have that information on scoring and performance levels, that's something we'll be sharing.
And is it OSSI's expectation that that will be part of our performance framework as it was in the past?
So I know that currently science is one of the options included in the measure survey for ESSA that's available for feedback, but Accountability 2.0 discussions are still in progress.
I'd also like to follow up on Ms. Wattenberg from Ward 3's question. If there is this drop-off in attendance at the high school level, if there was this mismatch of courses that students were taking versus courses they were asked to test in, whether it's geometry, algebra 1, or integrated math, doesn't that cast doubt on the reliability of all the scores for high school? We have some fantastically high-performing schools. Banneker, I think, had 98% proficiency rates. Some of our schools east of the river had single digits or even 0 proficient. And I'm trying to figure out how we're going to tackle the achievement gap when it really does go from 0 to 100. But also then to just question the instruments. If, we can't really rely on, or if there was doubt cast on Wilson, School Without Walls, and Ellington, I kind of sort of think the whole thing is in question.
So to be clear, I stand behind and OSSI stands behind the data. And as a measure of reliability and validity as an assessment, PARCC has demonstrated in its research that it is both valid and reliable. When it comes to actually looking at the high school business rules, we've mentioned the importance of communicating to ensure enrollment decisions are made that are appropriate. But it's also something where the vast majority of students, when we think about confidence, have a very traditional pathway. So we're looking at more edge cases where it would be a decision that needed to be made. So in summary, I think that is something when it comes to communicating the high school business rules and being very clear on that, that's a priority, but we are very confident in the data that we have available.
But the fact remains that we have enormous gaps in achievement as measured on the PARCC exam, and they're still kind of just proxies for poverty levels or English language abilities. And I'm seeing this, I won't call it an opt-out movement, but there was certainly less than an enthusiastic attendance at several of our schools. And it just seems to me that it's an opportunity to have a conversation about it, but are we harming the ability of our struggling students to show what they know because we don't have a measure of what's going on at the top. I mean, I think there's some consequences here that we're just, we're just not discussing.
To your point about looking at what works, I think that was mentioned twice about looking at bright spots, and I know that in DCPS and PCSB's presentation they highlighted some bright spots, but that's something we're also interested in looking at because we have seen where it works across different subgroups and it's not consistent, but ensuring that there's an opportunity to look at what's working and use that to push for improvement over time is something that's important.
Now, we all talk about using data to drive decisions. What decisions are schools and districts going to be able to infer from these results? And the sort of question to add on to that, we had been using, or at least some districts had been using, the scores on the state assessment to evaluate teachers. We've had a second administration of PARCC. It's very different than the first one, which was a rollout. Are we prepared at this point to say these are now 2 data points that we can use to show growth, evaluate teachers, and that the 3rd year will be sort of for real? Because I know we've held schools and teachers harmless for these last 2 years.
So I think I would say that the first 2 years of PARCC are also for real, as we hope to use multiple years of trends. I'd like to answer the first part of your question first, which is what we hope that schools and LEAs and teachers might do with this data. And I think there's multiple things that we hope and that we know that schools and districts use this data to do beyond examining instruction, both in the individual school classroom level and across grades and subjects. And across, as we've said, across trends across schools. We know that schools also use this information to allocate resources to see where do our students need more attention, what type of professional development and support should we be providing students across all grades and subjects. So that's one important piece of your question. I think for the teacher evaluation piece, OSSE itself does not mandate teacher evaluation. That's largely a district decision.
Yeah. And to the point about instructional use, I think what is particularly exciting about the PARCC assessments is the fact that so much is transparent and publicly available. So all of the PARCC blueprints, the evidence statements, performance level descriptors, practice tests, release items are all available for educators, students, parents, anyone who wanted to look at them. So that is another way to dive into the actual content and make that connection between score and actually what is assessed on the assessment.
Thank you so much. Do additional board members have questions for round 1? I have 2 really brief questions. One's a softball, but I'm going to save that for last. The first is, I noticed a striking assessment completion rate at the high school level between DC public schools and our very diverse public charter schools, where I think the public charter schools outperformed DCPS schools by about 16 points, if I remember that data correctly, in terms of completion rates.
Do you mean participation rates?
Participation rates, yes. And where is that disparity coming from? Where is that difference being actualized? And how are you instructing or advising LEAs, including our largest LEA, DC Public Schools, on what to do? And then where's the accountability when participation rates are incredibly low at the high school level?
Yes, we did notice differences in participation rates across sectors, and I will say I don't think we have a singular root cause that we can point to at this point, and that's one point of concern for us as the state as we report on participation rates and have to report that also to the U.S. Department of Education. So part of that process of accountability is actually working with the districts in working with them to look into the rates at particular schools or across the district to understand whether or not there might be procedural issues in play or other types of encouragement or clarification that might be important at the state or school or district level. And so part of our job is to actually work with them to identify those root causes together, and to ensure that there are plans in place to increase participation. And of course, the reasons that we find participation is important is because we want to make sure that we can report on the growth and levels of on track for all of our students, and to make sure that students are not being left behind, because the students who are not being reported on are the ones that get left behind in the kinds of supports that we can provide them.
Thank you. I'll be very interested to see how that conversation proceeds, because we need to get that right. And DCPS, if they're not doing it right internally, they need to ask for help, and they need to work with you all and other experts in the charter sector who are getting it right, so that they can do it right. My softball is, I was at the press conference where the results were released with the mayor, the deputy mayor, the superintendent, and I was really disappointed that we missed an opportunity. The entire conversation focused around 3 schools that had drops in rates, 3 primarily upper middle class schools, 3 primarily white schools that had drops. And we didn't do a lot of discussion around the lower economically advantaged or disadvantaged schools, our minority schools, our ELL learners. Can you talk about the growth that we've seen there? And if you want to raise a couple of schools that are doing it right and some of the tactics they're using, you have about a minute and a half.
So in terms of, again, 5 weeks in, so bear with me. But so what we've shown is just across the subgroups we were seeing improvements. But I think to your point, it is really important to take a look at those bright spots, as we mentioned, across different special groups of students to see what's working and share that information. And our role as support of the LEAs, thinking through how to facilitate and support that conversation will be critical. At this point, I can't highlight particular schools, but I think that is something that can be done. And DCPS and PCSB are looking into that information, and it's something that we're interested in helping to facilitate.
Yes, I'd just add that, ironically, because this is a very similar presentation to the one used at that, at the release, I don't have slides and particular data to share specifically about some of the schools that are doing amazing things in terms of both levels of on track and growth of students at all levels. I do think it is a point well taken, and a point that we don't want to miss, that really this is about making sure that all students have an opportunity to learn, that we are faced with higher standards for all of our students in their futures, and that this assessment holds them to higher standards, and we know that everyone can reach those standards with the quality of teaching and supports that we are all attempting to give across the city. And so we look forward to bringing more information with more detail about the great work that is happening, and that Ms. Wilson-Phelan also mentioned happening in her ward, and that's happening in wards across the city, and that we shouldn't neglect an opportunity to celebrate that, and also to look again at quote unquote what's working and make sure that all students have those opportunities. So thank you for raising it.
And I think board members would probably appreciate knowing the schools that did the best in their wards and the schools that need to continue to work, so that we can reach out to those principals and those school communities as well, both to celebrate and to get to work. With that, we'll move to a second round. If we could do a shorter, maybe 3-minute, we'll go Mr. Whedon, Ms. Wilson-Phelan, and then Ms. Wattenberg and Ms. Lord.
I just want to follow up on a couple things. And first, let me just echo my colleague from Ward 1's comments about her school. Ward 6 school saw growth across the board. Phenomenal things, both DCPS and DC public charters. And just honored to be a part of that community and seeing the growth and development of our schools. I think there was a comment before that we use the data to evaluate teachers, and that's a district decision. I'd like to emphasize that's an LEA decision, not a district decision. That's done at the individual local education agency level. And I also want to talk a little bit and get your thoughts about how you believe that schools are and should be using data. What I've seen this year, first 3 weeks of school, my daughter moved from elementary to middle school. She's doing a lot of testing, a lot of diagnostic testing. There's a lot of testing. Why can't we truly take these results we get from PARCC, make sure that that data travels with the students so that we reduce the need for testing and diagnostic testing. And I think another tangent on that question is, should we be using these tests as end-of-course tests to ensure learning before we promote students? I alluded to the fact that there are a number of students who are well behind grade level at the different levels, especially the middle school. Again, I'll use my family as the example here because I know the data. We have students reading at a kindergarten level in 6th grade. That is 100% unacceptable. Now, we need to work with the students, make sure that they can achieve it at level, and we need to find the resources and intervene. But are we appropriately using the data and moving students to where they should be to get the results that we want to see? How can we better use the data?
So one thing I want to, there's a couple pieces of your question I'd like to respond to. One is on the concept of ensuring that the assessments are streamlined. And as you know, you'll hear probably in the ESSA conversation later, there's an opportunity to reflect on the assessments across, at the state level, across down to the LEA level, to ensure that they're streamlined. I think when we come to this conversation, what's critical to look at is the purpose and the intended purpose of every assessment. A diagnostic will do something that is slightly different than a statewide assessment. So a diagnostic, potentially adaptive, has the opportunity to drill really deep into a particular area that a statewide assessment doesn't have the power. But when we think about we're able to use these assessments layered to provide good information, but we want to make sure it's still streamlined. So note that is something that when we're thinking about our transition to implementing ESSA, streamlining and looking at assessments and their purpose is a really critical component. So that's one important piece. When it comes to using the data and how schools are using data, something that we are working on as a priority is providing some additional assessment literacy, education, and engagement around how do you interpret and understand results, and how do you use that, partnering with our elementary, secondary, and specialized education team at OSSI. So note that is something that we think is really important and we're prioritizing this year.
Thank you. Appreciate the response.
Ms. Wilson-Phelan, and then Ms. Wattenberg.
Just a super quick question that might just reveal my statistical ignorance, but I see you cut the N off at 25. So if anything, if there are 24 students in a class, you don't report it. Given the size of a traditional elementary school in the city, there are so many non-reporteds. And so especially when we want to dissect the information related to race and class to actually understand where schools are closing gaps between race and socioeconomic class among students, it's very difficult to see that, at least in terms of the public. I understand the whole anonymity and protecting student privacy, but 25 seems like a super high bar to protect privacy, just to my ignorant mind. And so I'd love to just hear, so for example, if you had 24 kids in a class 1 year, that class comes offline and you can't see what happened with that class. You could cut the data in different ways, I think, to still protect student privacy. What's the thinking around 25 kids?
So to your point, the N of 25 is for the data privacy purpose, and at the individual school level, they have all of their information, are able to cut across and able to look in that way. From a public perspective, from the N of 25 is for that data privacy purpose. Accountability information.
No, I would just add that that it's a point well taken, and it's a constant balance that we're looking at with both at the state level for accountability purposes, for reporting purposes, and with our LEA partners. Excuse me for using district before. It's just a reliance on a term from a previous life with our LEA partners. So I do think that is something that we are taking into consideration if it is appropriate or possible to make changes in the future.
And I will say it did come up. We had a really wonderful conversation with the LEA leaders walking through their public results website information, and that did come up, and it was something that we took very seriously.
That's great. And just one tiny other comment about this. If you all are doing the analysis, because you obviously have access to all the student level data, and you can at least present conclusions about trends that you're seeing, I'm particularly interested in whether we do see schools that have more diverse student bodies performing better or not. But you cannot get that information based on the data that's published, because it is rare to find a school that has an N of 25 of all classes and races. In fact, I don't think there's any school that has that, because it would happen. You might actually see it in some of the charters. But even then, you can't really tell. You might have one charter for whom that's the case. And so it would be amazing if we could actually see. That's like a policy thing that would matter to the board as we're thinking about things like school attendance and weighing in on things that really matter to the public.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Wattenberg and then Ms. Lord.
Okay, let me run through some things very quickly, and some not so quickly. One, I want to really, really endorse what Laura said about the importance of following the kids and this whole idea of the longitudinal improvements. I think it's so, so important. And while I'm saying that, let me just say, I regard this very much as OSSI and the State Board will be working together to revise the way in which DC holds schools accountable and reports this data. So I really regard this as sort of our first public interaction about the kinds of things that need to change, and it's a terrific conversation, and I look forward to many of them. And as you can see, for a lot of us, this issue of the longitudinal growth is huge. Second, I talked about the scoring problem. I'm sorry, the correspondence problem at Wilson Walls. I also want to raise the problem of logistics and technology at both schools, and I do not know that they are the only schools like this or not. But I guess what I want to say is some of the problems are terrible and they have not been dealt with. We were promised a year ago they would be dealt with, and they were not. Let me just give you a sense of it, at least for Wilson, which is there's not adequate bandwidth in the school, the result of which is that there's only one place in the school where the testing can be done. It has to be done with carted-in computers, which I know a lot of people have to do. It's in the wing that has the library, as well as some other things, and only a certain number of kids can go, the result of which is, one, the wing with the library in a high school around finals time gets shut down for 4 to 6 weeks. Two, kids get pulled out of their classes to go take the tests because, for reasons that I can't completely understand, there's not enough room to send whole classes. So kids end up missing their classes. Three, teachers get pulled from their classes to proctor. And four, this, because of the bandwidth issues and these logistical issues, it takes place over many weeks. And so you have a total disruption of the school for a number of weeks. I know this is solvable, and it's not getting solved. And I need you guys to say you're going to get engaged in making sure that all of the LEAs, including this one, are in a position to allow the schools and the kids there to test in a way that doesn't disrupt the rest of the school. And I just want to say, while I was sitting in a previous meeting, I got an email from somebody, from a constituent, from somebody at Wilson, knows of several instances where classes were canceled because teachers had to go proctor for PARCC, because too many kids were in testing to be able to show have a regular class, et cetera. So point made, but I really think there needs to be a much better system for eliciting from the ground where there are issues, because clearly they're not getting to you, or they're not getting somewhere, and they really need to. Three, Mr. Whedon raised the issue of the enormous number of tests that are going on in all the schools, and one thing I really, really hope that we will all do cooperatively is take advantage of the provision in the ESSA law that allows us to inventory the testing that is going on across the city. I think coming to grips with that will go an enormous way in building up the credibility of the testing program, and it will allow us, as Mr. Whedon has said, to sort of find some ways to solve some of this. And lastly, you were talking about teacher evaluation being only at the school level, and Joe was saying is at the LEA level, but last time there were provisions at the state level, in the SCA level. And so are you suggesting that you are not going to, your inclination is not to include anything on teacher evaluation in the new rules?
No, I guess just to clarify, because I did give a very brief answer, I think the way that assessments are used, there's flexibility for LEAs in terms of how those are, and we have not yet finalized what future state plans will include.
So
in
that's up
terms
for
of
discussion.
use, yes, but in the past we have required that assessments be used as part of evaluation in some way, but there's been flexibility at the LEA level.
So to the other 2 points you raised about test administration and making sure that that runs really smoothly, getting feedback is really important on that to ensure that we can support LEAs in the best way possible to ensure that they have a smooth transition. This is something that all states are doing in transitioning to new assessments with new windows. So one thing that we did do was release a survey on test administration and how it went with a number of different categories, including technology, that all of the LEA test coordinators were requested to fill out. We did close that survey relatively recently, and we do have the data, so I'll be taking a look at that. And we have opportunities through our monthly Next Generation Assessment LEA Leaders meeting to engage with LEA test coordinators on exactly those issues. So it's an opportunity. So we encourage LEA leaders to raise those issues and communicate, because we are able to communicate with them weekly through a bulletin, but also monthly for an in-person back and forth. So test administration is important there. Some lessons learned: there were technology readiness guidelines produced to help schools assess where they are in their readiness and make plans ahead of time, so situations like that don't occur. So that's an opportunity to share that information. But there's also an opportunity to share across LEAs of what's working. Every situation in every school building is going to have a different and unique context when it comes to bandwidth, technology, classroom availability, and scheduling. But there are some good opportunities for lessons learned. It's something we talk across states, we can talk across LEAs, and we can talk across schools. So there's opportunities to build on that, looking forward into new test administration windows. So I hear you, and I think that's important. In terms of the streamlining of the inventory for assessments, our ESSA conversations are underway, so there's an avenue to have those conversations, so just more to come there.
Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wanberg. Ms. Lord, our at-large member.
Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so I'm going to pick up on that whole idea that there is too much testing. I also have been contacted by constituents, by teachers. They're losing enormous instructional time at the beginning of the school year for diagnostics. Then there's the test administration itself. Has OSSI actually surveyed the LEAs to see how much time is spent on practice tests, interim pacing tests? I know these are LEA decisions, but if there's no good science or evidence that practice tests actually lead to a better result on the end test, I think that's a conversation. I think that's an opportunity for a conversation, to use your words.
Yeah, I don't believe that we have had a formal avenue for requesting information from our LEAs on assessment use. However, I would say that as my colleague mentioned, assessments come in varying forms and formalities and uses, and I know that those instructional decisions we leave to the LEA to fit what is best for their instructional programs, and that I think I would also hesitate to say that the majority of the assessments that our teachers and instructional leads are choosing are less practice tests and more tests that might be either sort of formative or diagnostic assessments that are helping teachers serve those students better. That's what they would hope. And so we do encourage our LEA leaders, obviously, to make the choices that they think are best for their situations and their students, and that can be quite varied.
Mm-hmm.
Just seems like an opportunity to cut through the chaff and say, actually, these are very smart ways to go, or by opposite, there's no reason to be spending the first 6 weeks of school on diagnostics, particularly if the previous PARCC results show that they're very proficient. And then to my second point, I'm a little perturbed that the idea that our kids, that only 29% of our students are on track for college and career success. What does proficiency mean, and does that mean that anybody below the line is going to wash out in college, careers, or the military? Because I don't think that's the case. And if we continue to put out this line that, if you don't get above a 4 or 5, you're, hopeless, that sends a completely perverse signal.
Sure, and I don't think that that's the message that we'd want to put out at all. And I think it's, again, being really clear about what these performance levels mean. And I think the performance level descriptors give a lot of rich information about that. When it comes to the college and career ready determination level, which I think is what you're referring to, the research and work that went into that indicated that a student who received a 4 or above, they believed that they were likely to receive a C or better in a credit-bearing entry-level course. That's what that says. When it comes to performance levels and seeing growth and maybe where you are in 10th grade or 8th grade, what does that indicate? If you're not at level 4 and 5, it helps you figure out what types of supports you might be looking for in your next grade or in your post-high school experience, be it college or career. What types of supports do you need? Where are there areas of strength? Where are there areas of challenge? Do I need to find a program where it helps me a little more in my writing, because that's an area where I'm not yet there yet. So it's an opportunity to use the information to have a really realistic look at the types of strengths and challenges areas we have.
That's all well and good, but if I'm an employer and I see someone's got a 1 or 2, I'm not necessarily going to think that diploma is worth it, and perhaps the board has to think about making this a requirement for graduation.
That's interesting.
Do board members have additional questions? If not, I'm going to conclude this panel with 2 really brief questions of my own to follow up on Ms. Wilson-Phelan's question on subgroups. My understanding is that some states have public reporting and accountability group sizes as low as 5. Is OSSI considering reducing the number from 25 to a lower number as part of our ESSA discussion?
I would say that those conversations are in progress and that those things are being considered. I'm not aware of 5. I think
Quite low.
well,
I would look.
I will check the regulations. I believe that the U.S. Department of Education has set some parameters for us to work within, and so, but it is something we are considering about what might make the most sense for our context, given the, the level and size of the schools we serve, and what is both balancing sort of privacy and data quality with the ability to find out the most important things we want and make them transparent to the public.
Great. And my understanding, again, is that the current DC accountability workbook requires OSSI to report groups of 10 or more students publicly. What is the plan for complying with that requirement?
I'll have to check a little bit about what that is. I think that largely we made the decision based on both accountability and reporting this year together, so I can check and respond with more detail and clarity on that.
If you could get that information to our executive director, he will make sure that it gets to board members, including Ms. Wilson-Phelan and myself.
Great, thank you.
With that, thank you so very much for your time this evening. These are complicated issues, and the board is committed to working with you to reduce our opportunity gaps and provide ability for every student to succeed. So thank you so much for your time, and welcome to OSSI.
Thank you.
Now, a year ago, no one thought that Congress would be able to work together and reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, but they did with the passage of ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. ESSA offers states significant leeway in establishing new accountability frameworks for their schools. Tonight, we will hear from 2 national experts on what other states are doing with this new leeway. Kristen Amundsen is the executive director of the National Association of State Boards of Education, or NASB. You will hear a lot tonight. And a good friend of the DC State Board. I saw Chris earlier. There she is. She's getting ready. And Peter Zamora is Director of Federal Affairs for the Council of Chief State School Officers, which I believe Superintendent Kang is a member of, if memory serves. Welcome back to both of you. We're glad to have you here tonight. Please take your time, Chris. I believe you have a joint presentation, so hopefully we'll get that within the 10-minute time frame or so to leave a little bit more time for board discussion. And once Jamika has it ready.
Peter says, yes, he's glad to run the slides. Just
and we'll want to make sure the microphones are on so that our viewers at home can hear as well.
okay. I'll sit here. Huh? Does that work? I'm about 6 weeks out from knee surgery, and would just like to say that when I go through TSA screening, the lights dim all over the East Coast. But it's terrific to be here with all of you, and I know many of you are going to be with us in Kansas City in October, and the goal is no cane by then. We'll see. Peter and I are delighted to be here with you and to talk with you about the implementation of ESSA and some of what we're learning and some of what we feel still has to be learned or has to be sort of sorted out. So for no particular reason, we decided I'd go first, he'd go second. My sort of two areas of conversation are around big decision points that states have to make, state boards and state chiefs have to make, and second, some examples of state leadership. Peter's going to talk about the timeline and some pending regulations. I would say, Mr. Chairman, when you were talking about last December, you know, there was this sense of euphoria in education. We had won this battle to reauthorize the No Child Left Behind legislation, and frankly, nobody thought it was going to happen. But fairly quickly after that, I think, we began to recognize the wisdom of what George Washington says to Alexander Hamilton in Act 2 of the musical when he says, "Winning was easy, young man, governing is harder." And that's where we are today. We are talking to states across the country and beginning to see some examples of what works and what doesn't. First of all, I think what works is what's represented by the fact that Peter and I are here together, which is that when state chiefs and state boards work together, things work better than when they go off on their own. So I'll just say, from a big top-line level, you have a number of key decisions. One is, before you get down to N size and fifth indicator and all of those things, make sure you're clear again and can articulate to your public, what is your theory of action? As you now again have the opportunity to redesign how you will hold schools inside the District of Columbia accountable, what's your theory of action? What do you plan to have happen as a result of what you're doing? And I think that's just a good question every now and then to sort of take that back up one level. Other decision points that you're going to have to be making as you set goals for your achievement levels for students. What is your goal? Is your goal going to be 100% proficiency? Because, of course, we all know one way to achieve 100% proficiency is what I call the Lake Wobegon effect, which is if you set the bar down here, then of course it's easy to get every child over it. If 100% isn't your goal, which children are you going to leave behind? On the other hand, is your goal closing gaps? And if that's the case, what is your role as a state in setting meaningful goals for schools and LEAs? How are you going to translate those goals into improvement targets for LEAs? And how will all of this affect the ratings? Another big decision point that you're going to have to face will be what I call the fifth indicator problem. And it's a problem, it's an opportunity, it's whatever. But the law requires that at least one, it says not less than one, additional indicator of school quality or student success. And the ones that I have listed below are some of the indicators that other states are using. So some of them are using school climate and safety. How do you measure that? Do you give do you give questionnaires, and then do you really want to deal with the press stories about how the DC Board of Education is giving a multiple choice test on school climate? Engagement, how do you measure that? Attendance, access to or completion of advanced coursework, social and emotional learning, all of those are things that states are measuring. Hawaii is now measuring, I think it's Hawaii that measures the number of students who are registered to vote. And another state, maybe Oregon, is looking at volunteer hours. So there is a wide range of fifth indicators. I don't think I've seen the perfect one yet. Peter, I don't know about you. So that's a big issue that you're going to be faced with. And then finally, what does stakeholder engagement look like? The law says that state and local plans have to be developed with timely and meaningful consultation with the State Board of Education, and then it lists some other stakeholders. And I will just tell you that what that means, and we're having a webinar tomorrow at NASB, what that means across states varies widely from don't worry your pretty little head about it, we'll just tell you about it when it comes back, to some places where there's real collaboration. And CCSSO has a wonderful handbook on what community engagement and stakeholder engagement looks like. And my favorite quote from all of it is, there's a big difference between engaging people and having a meeting. So, 2 examples of, I think, great state leadership. One is the state of Washington, which has taken stakeholder engagement very seriously. They have, I think, 12 working groups, and it is my understanding, and I was just out there with them, I believe every mentioned stakeholder is a part of every one of the working groups, except for one where the board intentionally said we should not be part of that. So I think if you're really looking at what stakeholder engagement looks like, Washington State has set the bar. Each of those groups has a series of tasks that they're working on, and we're going to have Ben Rarick on the webinar tomorrow to talk about it. A second, I think, terrific and interesting example of an accountability system comes from the state of Kentucky, where they have determined that they want to graduate students who are college and career ready. Now, they have defined, and if you look on their bottom line, what they mean by college ready and what they mean by career ready. You might or might not agree with those definitions, but I will say that the ACT is their state summative exam, so that's one reason why they can do that. I think the interesting thing here is that a school or an LEA gets 1 point if student graduates college ready, 1 point if a student graduates career ready, but if they can demonstrate a proficiency in both areas, the LEA gets extra points on the state accountability system, and that translates into, I think, some other things that are beneficial. And finally, here's yours. Here are some of the things that the District of Columbia is doing in terms of laying out your timelines and the ways that you are involving stakeholders. And I just think that it's important for you all to keep that in front of you, remembering that your goal is to get to March 6th, which is your goal for submitting your state plan. And timelines are the thing Peter's going to talk about. So I'm sorry I've taken a couple more minutes, so I hope you will give Peter back
We'll
some
indulge
of my
both of you,
time.
of course.
Thank you, and I can move relatively quickly along. I'm going to address a few, potential pitfalls and sort of challenges that states are addressing as they move into the ESSA implementation window. And I think DC is very much on track, but when we look at the overall timeline, the flexibility waivers have expired back in August. Now the state is planning and engaging stakeholders. This is sort of a transition school year as we head into full implementation in 17-18, and that's when the new state plans take effect. So the timeline challenges are such that this is just a very complex endeavor, and I think that there are some substantial sort of high-profile issues that are likely going to generate a lot of public debate. Certainly accountability systems, strategies to turn around underperforming schools, teacher evaluation systems. Those are going to get a full sort of public airing, but there are also dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands, of much sort of smaller and more but also very sort of complex issues that are going to have to be addressed in the context of the state plan, and I think it's very important that these not sort of fall under the radar. So just a few that I grabbed out here, sort of at random a little bit, but data collection and reporting, for example. There are new subgroups that are required in the state and local report cards for homeless, foster, military-connected student outcomes. I don't know if if these systems are in place now, but if not, they're going to have to be put in place fairly quickly. Another potential sort of speed bump here is school-level fiscal reporting. So the statute requires that school-level financial data be reported on a per-pupil basis, broken down by source, so federal, state, local, and personnel and not personnel. And again, I'm not sure how well situated. We've found a lot of districts and a lot of states, this is not how they budget. They're not sort of prepared immediately to publish this information. That's potentially a major implementation concern. Also, we were hearing some about N sizes, and both for sort of accountability and for reporting. These are all questions that are going to have to be figured out. SEA set-asides, there are new opportunities to set aside 3% of the state Title IIA allocation for a state focus on school leaders, principal school leaders. Also, 3% set aside within Title I around direct student supports. There are also sort of new additions to the consolidated state plan. Some of those are in statute, some of those have been proposed in regulation, and such that these end up being very complex documents that can be, hundreds or in some cases thousands of pages. The new state plan requirements include, performance management system descriptions across dozens of different programs. It's just going to be a fairly voluminous application, and I think the state's going to have a lot of work to do to put it together. And it all happens fairly quickly. Here we are close to the end of September, and March 6th would be the deadline for the first. These are all proposed in regulations. For the first window would close on March 6th. So you'd have to have until March 6th to apply, and then July 5th is the next one. Then the timeline is such that the Department of Education has 120 days to approve or reject a state or request changes in a state plan. And then again, this is, 2017-18 school year is around the corner. So a lot of work to do, a lot of sort of complicated issues in a fairly short period of time. Also, to add an additional level of sort of uncertainty around this is that there are currently 4 different packages of open regulations that have been proposed. And, we know it was proposed. We don't know yet, of course, sort of what's going to be in the final regulations. And so I think that some planning and some work can happen now to sort of prepare, but you really can't start, completing the state plan until, we know what the final regs look like. That should be by the end of the year. But there's accountability reporting, assessments, innovative assessment pilots, and one that's, and those 3 have now been closed. So the public comment is closed. The department has yet to issue their final rules. But one that I would call particular attention to here as well is the supplement not supplant rule, and that's an open public comment. The comments are actually due on the 7th of November of this year, and there's a fairly sort of aggressive interpretation that's been proposed by the Department of Education. And it would essentially seek to promote parity in per-pupil funding between Title I and non-Title I schools, and that's a laudable goal, and it's certainly something that CCSSO supports. But there's going to be a lot of complexity potentially in implementation. And one of the potential methods for compliance, and this is only within the LEA. So I think primarily here in the District of Columbia, we're talking about DCPS. But it would require the LEA to use one of 4 methodologies, one of which is a weighted student funding formula, which, having done a small amount of research into DCPS, I believe there is some weighting there. But there's still some ongoing questions as to, under the proposed regulations, which again have not been finalized, that almost all state and district funding would have to go through the weighted funding calculation. And so that is both a subjective sort of question as to what constitutes almost all, as well as sort of whether compliance is in place there. And then also almost all of the district level expenditures would also have to be sort of equal or greater for Title I schools versus non-Title I schools. So school construction, school transportation, food service, if there's a construction activity that's happening in a non-Title I school, does that same construction have to happen in a Title I school? So a lot of these are open questions, and they're open questions that are going to have to be figured out relatively soon. So again, under the proposed regulations, which is not final, and it remains to be seen exactly where this is going to head, by December the 10th of next year, the LEA would have to demonstrate to the SEA that it has a methodology. And again, so very much open questions here. One other sort of aspect of uncertainty that I would describe here is, it's going to be a new presidential administration that is ultimately going to be receiving the state plans and evaluating the state plans. there's a tremendous level of uncertainty among states as to how a new administration is going to interpret regulations that are finalized at the end of this administration, or the process that they're going to use to evaluate state plans. And so generally what we're telling our state superintendents, and I'm sure what is, certainly is to come up with the best plans that meet the state's needs, and then be prepared to defend those plans.
And some states are going early. I mean, Washington State's going to go for 1st of December, just to get it in. Because the other thing, even if there was a complete harmonic convergence between the next Department of Education and this one, which I think is highly unlikely, remember that Congress did not approve those senior level people in the department. They approved, the secretary, but then all of the people who actually are going to do this work and move these along, many of them were not approved for a very long time. So I think we're entering into a real period of uncertainty. So there we are.
There we are.
Questions,
and here we have
Mr. Chair.
materials
We
on
were a little
both of our
over, but not
websites,
too
so,
much.
Yeah.
I think board members will probably go over more than you have. And with that, let's start board member questions with 5 minutes each. I'd like to defer to NASB's immediate past president, Mary Lord, to kick us off if she'd like. Or we could go on to someone else.
I think we should have others have a turn because I might get too down in the weeds too quickly, and chances are everyone will ask my questions.
Great, then Ms. Wilson-Phelan first.
I'd love to just hear more about the supplement, not supplant. That's new information to me. And what I didn't fully understand about what you shared was it said that you needed parity between Title I and non-Title I students, though I thought the purpose of Title I was actually to provide additional supports to students who need additional supports to succeed. So could you just start by clarifying that a little bit?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And so supplement, not supplant is a sort of long-standing fiscal rule, and it sort of works in conjunction with other fiscal rules. And basically, the way that it's been interpreted since it was first put in place in 1970, I think it was, that essentially that you have to show that state and local funding formulas are not being reduced by virtue of a school actually receiving Title I funds.
Got it.
And so essentially, yeah, so I should have said parity in state and local funds between. And so largely, so the new interpretation would actually require sort of equality of state and local funds or something approaching equality before sort of putting the Title I funds on top of that.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
here's the other piece of that. A big part of why this has become such a bloody battle, and what is, well, because the department believes correctly that state plans ought to be looking at the issue of whether, because so much of school budgets are, as you know, driven by salaries, and teachers who are more experienced are also more expensive. So a piece of this is a well-intentioned effort to encourage districts and schools to see that kids who need the most experienced teachers are not always stuck with the first-year teacher. That's a perfectly laudable goal, and we all agree. It's then that the department got into, and we're going to tell you precisely how you have to do that. And, it gets back to one size fits all, which doesn't. Now they're up to 4 sizes fits all, but that, to me, is reminiscent of the old SIG grants, and I was at a think tank when we analyzed SIG grants, and all 4 of the methods, none of them worked, or at least not consistently. What we're saying to the department is, why don't you tell states, this is our big goal, and then say, please come back to us and tell us how you plan to do that.
Okay, great. Could you also, okay, now I've lost my question. Just a second. Could you also define the role of the state boards in those 4 additional provisions that you outlined? Mm-hmm. So my understanding is we know we review ESSA and the application there, but are there additional authorities associated with those bills?
How
and laws?
closely have you read those regs?
Fairly closely. I mean, so it would be sort of part of the state and the SEA's sort of general enforcement authority over, Title I. So this would be a sort of a Title I requirement, and it would sort of fall, as the jurisdiction has defined sort of authority over federal programs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other board members with questions? Ms. Lord.
I'm up. First of all, thank you for coming out tonight. I see this as not only a battle won, but a huge opportunity to finally get the next generation of school reform launched with a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down approach. So first, let me follow up on the whole engagement thing that Washington State and others are doing. We heard from at our annual conference for NASB and other places that engage, particularly your teachers, but your parents, your employers. I'm proud to say that the State Board of Education has done a lot of engagement. We've had forums in all 8 wards. We have a survey. It's still open. We're still getting comments. So it's been great, but I feel like we're kind of working in an environment where people are over-engaged but under-involved, or feel that they're not involved in the decision-making process. That sort of engagement is for show. I'm confident that it isn't the case in our point, but help me understand if there's some particular points that have proved very useful for other states in terms of engaging their public.
I think you got to be clear about what it is that your working groups or your listening groups get to decide, because ultimately, it is you and OSSE that are going to submit the plan. And the problem always with advisory groups, I have found, is that sometimes what they really want to do is sit there and get the vote. So you need to be clear about that. But on the other hand, if you talk to enough people, it seems to me that themes emerge. And so the states that are doing this now have not yet moved, I think, to where they're saying, okay, these are our recommendations specifically to the state board. They're still in that listening process. I would say build in as much time for listening as you can. Peter, anything else you would
Just
say?
sort of as a general theme, we've been urging the states to sort of reach out to non-traditional partners and using non-traditional, in other words, don't just go to the usual suspects to hear the same things that you would ordinarily intend to, hear, but really reach out to different communities, try different mechanisms. We've seen states that have done, public service announcements on the radio, that have, hashtag campaigns around getting engaged. So I don't know that there's sort of a single way to do it, but, I think aggressively and thinking outside the box a little bit.
Yeah. The Chamber of Commerce this week said that higher ed, K-12, and employers have to get out of their silos. So I think that speaks to that non-traditional constituency. The other question is, do states have the bandwidth? Because we've been asked to do a lot of heavy lifting, and as you heard from our earlier presentation, just administering the PARCC test in a small city state like ours has its challenges. So I'm wondering if there are particular areas where we might want to think of boning up on or doubling down on human capital.
I think you're going to have to do some of that. I think you're going to have to think also in terms of how you can use outside organizations. I think CCSSO and NASB can offer great policy advice, for example, but states got decimated in the recession. And so a piece of what is going to happen if the Every Student Succeeds Act is going to be successful is for them to come back. I do think that somebody needs to work on a lot of the things that Ms. Wattenberg was talking about, just the sheer nuts and bolts of making sure that when schools and districts administer exams, that they have the bandwidth and the machinery and the personnel so that the entire calendar does not read testing days. Because if you want to guarantee that you will create an opt-out movement where you didn't have one before, it is having every day on the calendar from March, April, May, and June read testing.
And I would just sort of pick up a little bit on Chris's point that, not to reinvent the wheel sort of in each jurisdiction. And we have a lot of materials at CCSSO, and we're also hosting a series of meetings where we're bringing together states and sort of pairing states up and, learning from colleagues in other jurisdictions.
Yeah. So really use both these organizations and just, we talk to each other multi-times a week. So there's really no daylight between us, so.
And I guess my final question is, picking up on the theory of action, how do we make sure that this isn't No Child Left Behind light, that we know how to do what we do, we went through the waiver process, we have bureaucracies set up to handle this? That's kind of one of my biggest fears, because I see this as a real game changer if we do it right.
Remember that even during No Child Left Behind, which was a very prescriptive piece of legislation, states came back multiple times and said, you know what, we want to change how we measure this, we want to change that accountability measure. Don't view March 6th as setting something in concrete. Continue to look, and particularly on fifth indicator, where the measures the stuff I think you want to measure, the measurement tools are not very good yet. So what I'd say is view this as a process.
Absolutely. And I think one of the areas where there's substantial flexibility or almost sort of untrammeled flexibility is around what we actually do in schools that are identified. And so, there's some flexibility around accountability, but there's substantial flexibility around sort of evidence-based school improvements. And so I think, in a way, I don't know that any state would replicate that sort of escalating ladder of sanctions under No Child Left Behind, but engage communities, sort of evaluate community needs, and then implement evidence-based interventions. That's really, I think, a tremendous opportunity to sort of shift away.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Lord. Next, Mr. Whedon from Ward 6.
First, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. I really found the conversation about supplement, not replace, very enlightening, because I believe that's a problem that we've had in the district with local at-risk funds. We've seen shifting around of budgets and not clear transparency there, and I would argue at least in the Ward 6 schools that has occurred, and we would like to make sure that the funding that's supposed to go to the most at-risk kids actually goes there and is supporting those students. I wanted to get your thoughts on another thing that's come up a couple times today around how can we measure and report out the growth of students as opposed to flat scores. I think that's something that at least the citizens in my ward are very interested in.
I think that there are some interesting models out there. I would say that I don't know of one that I would just say, well, just go to Tennessee and just, take theirs off the shelf. Because a piece of, I think, what you want to do is find some way to make sure that you're also measuring growth among like schools, so that you're not taking the whitest, most affluent school and measuring it, against perhaps a very low-income school. So you gotta find bands or quartiles or something that lets you do that. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that there are some ways that you can reward schools that may still be not achieving proficiency, but that are maybe showing greater growth than a school that's kind of coasting and sitting on its laurels. It involves a lot of work with statisticians. There are, and I'm going to send to Washington State, and I will be happy to send to you all a couple of papers that were done back in the days of the late and lamented think tank education sector that addressed this issue that might also help you think in terms of some new ways of doing some things.
Would appreciate that. And I'd also love to get thoughts and let you comment to this, but also on reducing the achievement gap and how we can really reward schools there.
Well, and so we have some materials on our website at ccsso.org/ESSA where we've sort of, presented some descriptions of different kinds of accountability models, and then, we have a team of assessment experts, and then, partly what we do is sort of look to other states. So I think it was Colorado 10 years ago or so that started to make some initial moves around growth models, and, learning from our colleagues around, what's worked well there, what could need some improvement, and, I don't know that there's sort of a perfect, way of measuring growth or a perfect accountability system, but there's one that reflects the values of the community. And I think, through the stakeholder engagement combined with the technical expertise, that some of the partners can bring to bear, that could end up coming up with a much better system.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Whedon. Ms. Wattenberg, and then Vice President Williams.
Thanks for coming. It's been very interesting. I have a couple of very quick questions, and then I also want to come back on the supplement, not supplant. First, the new law requires disaggregation by a set of new categories, as you described, homeless, children, foster, and military. One question I have, one thing that I'm very interested in is being able to disaggregate according to lowest income, because the school lunch is no longer a good proxy for that. And I'm curious why the federal law didn't require, for example, disaggregation by temporary assistance for needy families or something like that. And do you have a recommendation for how we should do that?
Do you want to go?
I think that would certainly be, it's not prevented by the statute, it's not expressly required, but I think one way to think about ESSA, is it's the floor, but it shouldn't be the entire building or the ceiling.
And so they just didn't include it because they were trying not to put the kitchen sink in it, as you're
Well, and there is, there's another requirement that's sort of flown under the radar, is that the state's going to have to make the data available in a format that can be cross-tabulated. So where you could actually sort of connect different subgroups to each other and sort of get much more granular. And so that ended up succeeding.
Well, then I would want this to be part of that. So yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a compromise bill,
Yeah.
too.
Okay. Second, going back, and I don't expect this to be our situation, but going back to one of the slides, there's the first round where you can submit, and then there's a second round. Second round, I think, was July 6th, and then Ed Department has 120 days. So what happens either if after 120 days, the Ed Department, if you did it in July, the Ed Department rejects your proposal, and or what if you don't get it in? What happens? I mean, it used to be they take away your money. Is that still the same thing? And
It's one reason that both organizations have actually asked for a delay in the timeline on the implementation. And I think that is actually something that we might be successful in getting. I feel like even if things moved swimmingly and you got it in on the 6th of March, sort of the earliest that 120-day clock would tick, do the math and think about starting a school year having had, weeks to implement all of the things that you had put in your plan. I just feel like this timeline is too aggressive. And so I wouldn't tell you to count on it, but I will say we're asking for it. I know the chiefs are asking for it. And actually, Secretary King has talked about it.
Mm-hmm. And part of that, I think, was the timeline for the identifying the schools using the new systems. And so, I think they might end up moving back. There's been some suggestion, these sort of submission windows. But, I think it's going to be an ongoing process. And I think, as Chris was saying, none of it, it's not necessarily going to be done in March.
so if we get something in, we're likely to get
Something back.
something.
And I wouldn't certainly want to speak for the U.S. Department,
Yeah, no,
specifically not for the next administration that we don't know who they are yet. But I think, showing good faith, moving forward
Right.
and looking to the history of No Child Left Behind, it took a couple of years, and if not more, for all state plans to be approved, but.
All right. Okay, last quick question, and then this broader one. The last quick one is just, you listed under the 5th indicator, educator engagement. And my question is, my understanding is that the 5th indicator has to be something you can disaggregate at the student level. So how can you, I'm just curious, because a number of us have talked about different educator engagement.
Yeah, all I know is that it is a thing that that states are talking about. I think they're not talking about doing that as their only as the only thing they would do for that fifth indicator. But particularly if you're doing a school climate indicator, educator engagement could be rolled into that.
So part of it would have to be disaggregatable,
Yeah,
but part of
right.
it could be, okay.
And then,
that-
excuse me, just under the proposed regulations, also likely to yield improved academic outcomes or
And that-
increased.
Which is where I think that comes in stronger, educator engagement comes in stronger there. But I think there's going to be a lot of not very good fifth indicators for a while, let me be honest. I think there'll be a lot, either people will choose something very simple like attendance that they already collect the data on and can measure easily, or there will be stuff that is not very good initially. I mean, those are the two sort of polar extremes.
All right, so my last one, I'll make it short just as a request, I guess, for information. Sort of on the supplement, not supplant, and following up on what Joe Whedon said, is in DC, in addition to the supplement, not supplant issue that comes down federally, we have our own local funds that are only supposed to go to at-risk, that's supposed to follow at-risk students and fund at-risk programming. And there's an ongoing difficulty with making sure that they get to the right kids and to the right schools. So I'm very interested, and I think a lot of people would be very interested in really trying to figure out how to sort of roll these two together maybe, or use a common framework for dealing with both of them so that part of the school report card and part of the state report card gets as deep as we can to clarify where the money's going programmatically, I guess. And so any help, I don't even know enough to explain it, but I think you get what we want.
Absolutely.
And
it's-
any help you could give us in finding models and how to do that, I think would be really, really appreciated.
Happy to do that. And, you know, it's an extraordinarily complex issue and also sort of very politically controversial. You know, just this morning there was a hearing before the House Education Committee where there was a lot of sort of fireworks. And I think there remains to be seen sort of what will come out at the end of the process. But a lot of states have a lot of questions. You know, for example, you know, school construction. You know, if a new school is built within a district and it's not a Title I school, does that mean that you have to build an equivalent school that is a Title I school, you know, at the same time? Or, you know, if there's a lead abatement program and it doesn't affect all schools equally, is that going to hamstring? And, you know, things when getting as granular as, you know, the health benefits of the employees. You know, if one school there happens to have more families and you're covered under family health care, that could put a school out of compliance. And so we very much sort of appreciate the impulse, but have a lot of questions around how it's going to work in practice.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Stay
Great.
tuned.
Yeah, exactly.
There's going to be some significant policy advocacy action by probably the original coalition that supported ESSA.
And then we will move to Vice President Williams and then Ms. Jolly from Ward 8.
Thank you for coming. This is really quite informative and interesting. Coming from an area where we have lower performing schools, it's been proven that leadership and teachers are one of the better indicators of how a school performs. In the past, before PARCC, our teachers were penalized under a system where if the students didn't test well, they faced negative consequences. Under this system, we have the opportunity to look at new measures of teacher evaluations and success. Can you recommend some states we can look at or some things that we can look at while we're looking at this process?
Who do you think is doing a good
Teacher
job?
evaluation.
Yeah, on teacher eval.
I mean, we do have, that's sort of one of the priority areas that we've identified, and so we do have, some very good materials and could connect with other states. I mean, the way that I'm thinking about a lot of this stuff is that there's not necessarily a perfect or an ideal, but, you know, the question is sort of going back to what are the values of the community and sort of what do we want to, and, you know, how do we then interpret those values through the new ESSA statutory sort of opportunities. So I think surveying what's out there and seeing what's the best fit in DC is the way to go.
I think one other thing I'd point out is that the elimination of the highly qualified teacher requirement is, I think, a positive step under ESSA. When I was in Fairfax, we always, the school that we had the most teachers who were not, for some reason or other, certified was always Thomas Jefferson. And it was because we got a PhD person to teach some nuclear biology class, and he or she didn't have some stupid bulletin board class, and we'd have to go down and beg the Department of Education to certify them. You now have much more flexibility in determining, as a state, what a highly qualified teacher would be. And there are two places I would offer up to you that you could really make a great improvements, I think. One would be in CTE classes, where you could really take practitioners and move them into working with students and eliminate some of that bulletin boardness, you know. And the second would be in the arts, where I think you could bring in, again, people who are, dancers or musicians, and might not want to go through all of the certification requirements. So I just lift that up as a positive part of the law.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Williams. Ms. Jolly from Ward 8.
Thank you, and thank you for your time and input tonight. So one thing that really strikes me about this conversation is that so much of it still seems to echo the stick and carrot of NCLB. Walking into ESSA, we're still looking at this as, well, how can we use these rankings and this accountability system to spur schools into raising test scores? As though the only reason that teachers would want to raise test scores is for some accountability system. Not that we become teachers because we deeply care about students and want to invest them in lifelong learning. So I'm wondering then, especially too because you've so emphasized this is our opportunity to show what we value as a state, what opportunities do you see for a system that wants to value things like deeper learning, that wants to value meeting students' needs in the ways that community schools do? How do we show, not just through the factors that we've already talked about tonight, but through the non-academic measures, that we recognize that school quality is about more than just test scores in a way that is really deep and rich and doesn't kind of demean the role of schools and teachers as horses who follow carrots on sticks?
I'll start and then Peter can chime in. I would say two things. One is to think about expanding even what you use as your assessment. I think it is possible, without going into the innovative assessment pilot, which we could talk about a long time, but it is possible to add things like performance assessments, and particularly I heard Ms. Lord talking about the science assessment, for example. That would be a great opportunity there. Portfolios are another opportunity that already exists. You don't have to ask anybody's permission for that. And then I'd say, look carefully at what you report to the public and on what things are you going to measure schools, because you don't have to just say test scores and grad rates. You can do a much richer look. Georgia has, I don't know how many indicators Georgia has. Georgia probably has too many, but they've got a very wide array of things. The state of California has developed a dashboard system, and I think they're going to be working on refining that. But that was done absolutely intentionally, saying we are trying to promote deeper learning, and how can we do that? So there are some states that are working toward it. I think the message we want to leave with you is this is not a done deal in March.
Absolutely.
What else do you want to say about how else states are doing that?
Well, and I think, again, just to reiterate, and we have also a document around sort of state strategic vision that we've created, which is sort of start with that as your, baseline, and then see the different areas of the law where that can be manifested. So, just say, for example, deeper learning. As we look at the assessments, is our assessment measuring what we really value? Is our accountability system, some states are very interested in career readiness indicators and have looked at that, and then, so you can manifest that value in the accountability system. But also then maybe in the school improvement space, do you want to, the state can create a list of evidence-based interventions for use in underperforming schools. That can be sort of an exhaustive or non-exhaustive list. So you can basically, identify a lot of evidence that supports deeper learning or career readiness or, arts education or what have you, and sort of use these as mechanisms to communicate the values sort of through policy.
This is just me wondering aloud now because I have another 53 seconds. But I'm just wondering, too, how we might be able to roll into our plan that we value more than just the student test scores, whether they're measured through PARCC or through portfolios. Because, I went to Garfield Elementary's back to school night, and their parent engagement that they do there is fantastic. And I think that it should be reflected in a greater way in the way that we rank and categorize our schools.
Couldn't do that. There is nothing standing in the way of adding that to some way that you would both measure, a school, but also then report out.
Yeah, because I find often in my school visits that the schools that I would want to send my kids to, their scores don't look great, but what's happening in classrooms is fantastic. And as a career teacher, I don't care about the scores. I care about what I see, and I'm just wondering how we can better capture that in our accountability system. That's what we're all wondering, but
I think that's
just
the
thinking
big
aloud.
challenge of ESSA.
Yeah,
And the big opportunity.
absolutely.
Do board members have additional questions? Hearing none, I don't have any myself. So I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. It's a challenging task that the Congress and U.S. Department of Education has put before us, but I know that
Put
we
on
are.
your laps. Not us, you.
I know that we are up to the task, and we look forward to working with both of your organizations. And I think most of my colleagues will be attending the national conference in 3 or 4 weeks in Kansas
We're
City.
looking forward to it. We've got a terrific program planned, an awful lot focused on the twin challenges of excellence and equity. And so we hope it will meet your needs, and we'll look forward to seeing you. Plus barbecue is all I'm going to say.
Wonderful. Thank you,
very
Ms.
much.
Zamora.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Terrific. With that, we are moving on to our last agenda item, which is a proposal from Ms. Wattenberg. So with that, I will turn it over to her.
Okay, thanks. And this is a simple motion, and the one thing I want to say is based on some final feedback. It's slightly changed from what some people think it might have once been, but hopefully it captures what everybody, or what many people wanted. So the motion is that we establish 3 SBOE committees, one named Governance, Personnel, and Administration, to discuss these matters in detail as necessary and bring discussion items and proposed actions in this area to the board. One named Budget, to discuss the board's proposed and ongoing budget and bring discussion items and proposed actions to the board in this area. And one named Every Student Succeeds, to discuss ideas and proposals related to ESSA and to bring discussion items and proposed actions to the board in this area. 2, that each committee meet at least once prior to October 5th. That the Governance, Personnel, and Administration Committee be chaired by Karen Williams, that the Budget Committee be chaired by Joe Whedon, and that the ESSA Committee be chaired by Ruth Wattenberg. And 6, that each committee aim for membership breadth, with all members encouraged to volunteer and all chairs urged to recruit.
Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second the motion for discussion.
Thank you. Let's open it for discussion. Ms. Wattenberg, did you want to start?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think all 3 committees will be very beneficial to the board in terms of allowing for discussion of some urgent issues and to do so in an expedited way, and allow the board to then have forward discussions based on committee discussions.
Additional discussion?
Could I just hear from the nominated chairs whether they have interest in leading those subcommittees?
Let's do them backwards. Ruth, are you interested in chairing an ESSA committee?
Yes, I am, and I did actually talk to all of the people, so presumably they will all say yes with greater or lesser enthusiasm.
No pressure.
Mr. Whedon?
I'm happy to serve.
Vice President Williams?
Since I'm already doing it, I guess I will continue to serve.
Additional discussion.
I would just say from an operational perspective, I think it would allow board meetings to be much more efficient by having work done in committee, vetted by members who bring the prospective constituents to the table, and then allow us to get to decision points potentially more quickly than we've been able to get to in the recent past.
Ms. Lord?
Just to put these things in perspective, when we've had committees, we have been able to do a lot of heavy lifting. It's been full participation. I'm thinking, for example, of my Ward 4 colleagues' truancy committee, which convened people. We had principals, we had parents, we had students, and we not only were able to continue being part of a conversation around truancy, but to change the rule that was adopted after some unintended consequences surfaced. So it's a very useful tool for forwarding the board's work, but also to provide some continuity for the board. As we heard tonight, the Every Student Succeeds Act will be a process. It's not a one-time deal, and I totally support Ms. Wattenberg because she did a lot of the heavy lifting on the waiver. But I also think that all of us need to participate, particularly in the budget governance process, because that's not a little committee work. That is the voice of the board. So as long as the committees are inclusive and have a sense of structure and report regularly out, I think it's a very good way of providing continuity for the board, because we are going to be seeing some changes and some continuity for the work.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. Additional discussion, Ms. Jolly?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious about more than just who's willing to chair these committees. Are there actually board members who are willing to serve on these committees? Because I want to make sure, I mean, the word silo has been bandied about a number of times today. I want to make sure that the board's work doesn't end up being siloed into committees of just one or two people. I'm also, before I can vote on a personnel committee, I want to know exactly what it will be doing. Like, will the personnel committee be managing the day-to-day actions of staff? Will they simply be in charge of performance evaluations? How will that work? So, I mean, I would like to know more about that.
Well, I'll just respond a bit, but I think it's sort of up to all of us. My sense is that there is a lot of interest in participating in committees that will be efficient and that will able to bring stuff to the board where it can be acted on. And I think having, even if it's only 2 or 3 people on a committee, having a few eyes spend some time on it to bring it to a bigger group, I think is a plus. So that's what I would hope for. And I'm sorry, my mind is totally failing. What was the second thing?
Who wants to serve on them, and what will the personnel committee do?
Oh, so the personnel one would be to talk about sort of the governance and how staffing works. That's more about that. I would say it's not specific.
I have 2 points of information regarding committee service. The president, according to our current bylaws, the president shall be an ex officio member on every such committee. So the president would serve on all of these. And to Ms. Lord's point and to yours, any member of the state board may attend an ad hoc committee executive session. So any committee meeting is open to any board member according to our bylaws. Additional discussion. Mr. Whedon.
I'd just like to add that I think there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I think part of this is an effort to make sure that all of us as representatives of our constituents are stepping up and doing some of that work and removing the burden from the officers of the board and the executive director. We have a small staff. We need to all step up and do our part. And some of these conversations, I think, could be fleshed out and options created and presented to come to the full board, as opposed to having those conversations, whether it be in a working meeting or the public meeting. So that's the vision that I see, at least for the budget committee. And again, I'm happy to serve there. The one question I have, back in the fall, summer, whenever it was, I'm blanking on the time frame, but we established priorities, and we're omitting the priority of graduation requirements in the committee structure here. One was about governance. We had the ESSA. So I'm wondering if we should also do something to have a committee looking at the graduation requirements.
Well, I'm going to interject here for a second. We had a retreat in February. It was a day long. Board members attended and discussed our priorities at length. Among our priorities was closing the achievement gap, and so we formed a committee on that, led by Tiara Jolly. Another, to my recollection, was a committee on graduation requirements as well. So I think we've already created that. We also decided at that meeting, there's a gnat in front of my face, so I apologize.
It used to be over here.
It's migrating. We also discussed ESSA at great length. It had just been passed. Chris Amundsen from NASB presented to us, and we decided as a group at that retreat that ESSA was something that was too important to delegate to one person and one committee chair to deal with, and that we wanted to deal with it as a board. I still feel that is the most responsible way to deal with something this large is to deal with it together. I would also suggest that governance, personnel, administrative issues, and budget are all related. If the budget committee doesn't know what the personnel/administration committee is doing, neither can make decisions. And I feel like we're actually creating a little too much bureaucracy here. And if the board does go forward with this, I would suggest that that be collapsed into just one administrative committee. I'd also point out that I suggested a version of this 20 months ago when I was running for president of this body, and suggested that we have two vice presidents, one that headed administrative issues and one that headed policy issues. We're a policy-making board, or policy-approving board, technically. We need to make sure that we continue to be very focused on the educational needs of our students, and I think that we need to make sure that that is where we spend the bulk of our time and resources, and having staff be required to provide capacity to multiple committees is challenging. I think we all recognize the challenges our staff has in terms of capacity. So if this body decides to move forward, I would suggest that we have a single administrative committee and remain with ESSA with the full board.
I thought about that, and I'd be curious for the perspectives of my colleagues. So I remember that conversation, and that we did assign responsibility for graduation requirements. I think it was a working group. I don't think it was a committee, and I do actually believe there's a distinction in our bylaws. And there's an official distinction. So a committee structure requires that we actually vote on a committee structure. And I believe there are things related to Open Meetings Acts to be followed and so on and so forth, versus a working group that just figures out how to go forward with the work and brings proposals back to the board for consideration, which might lead to the creation of a formal committee. I know that sounds bureaucratic, but I do think the distinction is relevant. I know we haven't had any movement in the graduation requirements area, so maybe we do need a committee in order to move that forward on the record. In terms of your comments related to ESSA in particular, I'm completely open to creating one administrative committee if that makes sense to other people. I personally feel like we are asking similar questions with all of the working and public meetings that we're having related to ESSA. And I do think that is because when a collective body takes ownership over something versus a certain group of people that feel accountable to something, it's very easy to just think your colleague is going to bring it up, right? Like that is human nature. It's studied behavior psychology. I'm not bringing up new information. And so I support this committee structure because I think it will get us to a better set of questions that progress us toward making a decision or at least creating specific suggestions related to ESSA. And I worry we will not get there if we continue to spread the work among 9 people and not have a true designated voice from the board to carry that work forward. And we did do that in the past, and it seems to have worked with broader engagement, but it just helps. It helps to have a board member leading that work to sort of bring the questions out that might be in all of our minds. And instead, we're spending all of our working meetings getting to all these same sorts of questions rather than getting to the depth and in the directionality that we need in order to really provide significant and important feedback on this topic. That's my personal observation.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Vice President Williams.
I agree on ESSA, so I'm not going to talk about that. But to have a separate personnel and a separate budget committee might be very cumbersome since 90% of our personnel issues are budget issues. I mean, our budget is 95%. So to have that broken out into 2 different committees might be cumbersome. So maybe Joe and I can work together if that's the way the board wants to have a committee.
Right. I'd just add that I think the discussion was around personnel and other administrative items. We need to do a bylaws update. I think it's required every 2 years. So there's other administrative things too, which aren't directly related to budget. So I think the idea was, let's make sure that all of these things get done and we get the appropriate staff. If it's one committee or multiple, I don't think it matters, but I think we need a smaller group diving into some depth on these issues.
I accept that as friendly.
Ms. Lord.
Having served on a number of boards, there typically is a finance committee. Everybody on the board must weigh in on things like budgets or things of immediate concerns, shortfalls, unexpected resignations of people. But it's important for the continuity and the transparency. So I think if we think about it not as budget, but as kind of a financial picture that includes budget, that includes personnel, we're going to be moving in the right direction. And it is sort of our fiduciary responsibility, if you will, as a board to make sure that everything is spent well and budgeted correctly and that staffed correctly.
So I just want to make sure we know where we are. I believe we had a friendly amendment accepted to do 1 administrative committee. And so that is currently the case, and an ESSA committee. And is that an official friendly amendment on a graduation requirements committee, Laura? Ms. Wilson-Phelan, I apologize.
Actually, it was Joe that brought it up.
Okay. Is that another suggested friendly amendment?
I have not made that motion. It would be up to the person who made the original motion, and we're still waiting for the person who seconded the motion to accept the friendly amendment that's on the table.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Can I just suggest, in the interest of efficiency, is that the graduation requirement issue gets saved until the working meeting? And
Happy to do that.
We do these 2 committees right now.
Okay. Any further discussion? Ms. Jolly?
I understand the need for there being like a deeper dive into ESSA, but I have to be frank as well and say that I am uncomfortable with that work. I mean, I don't know how much because of Hatch Act I can say, but right now I think that the members of the board whose communities have the most students in them and who should have, I think, an outsized input into the work of ESSA are folks who, because of other obligations that come along with this job, are not able to devote time to that committee right now. And I'm really uncomfortable with a lot of the nitty-gritty decision-making work about this thing that guides literally everything else that we do being left to just 3 people.
Well, if I might, just to respond to that, it would be my hope completely, as it is for the other committees, as that the goal of the committee is really to organize some thinking and to find stuff out and to be totally about engaging the rest of the board in a serious way. That would totally be the point. So just to be totally clear.
Any additional discussion? If not, I'd like to call the question, and let's do a roll call vote. Ms. Wattenberg, could you read the motion combining the first 2 clauses as a single
that
committee?
we establish 2 committees, one named the administrative committee to discuss, one named Personnel Administration, Governance, and Budget to discuss these matters in detail as necessary and bring discussion items and proposed actions in this area to the board. And one named Every Student Succeeds to discuss ideas and proposals related to ESSA and to bring discussion items and proposed actions to the board in this area. 2, that each committee meet at least once prior to October 5th. 3, that the Governance, Personnel, and Administration Committee be chaired by Karen Williams. And 4, that the ESSA Committee be chaired by Ruth Wattenberg. And then I would suggest maybe the committee wants to sort of figure out a co-chair thing, but I'm not going to get into that. That's my... Oh, and last, and that each committee aim for membership breadth with all members encouraged to volunteer and all chairs urged to recruit.
And the second agrees with those amendments, correct?
Yes.
Great. Let's do a roll call vote.
Mr. Jacobson.
Abstain.
Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams.
Come back to her.
Yes.
Ms. Lord.
Yes.
Ms. Wilson-Phelan.
Yes.
Ms. Wattenberg.
Yes.
Ms. Anderson. Ms. Anderson. Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Whedon.
Yes.
Ms. Jolly. Ms. Jolly.
Abstain.
Mr. President, the motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Wattenberg, for bringing that issue before us and making it a priority for this board.
And we look forward to all the ex officio participation as possible.
If I had more time. With that, I think that concludes our business for this evening. If board members have short statements or facts or events coming up that they'd like to tout briefly, Ms. Lord and then Mr. Whedon.
Thank you. I will be brief. Earlier this month, we celebrated the kickoff of Attendance Awareness Month. It's actually more than a month. It's attendance awareness throughout the year. We have these wonderful green attendance bands, but the bottom line is the easiest, most convenient and important way any person can help a child is to get them to school on time. Punctuality is a great habit to foster from the earliest years. I know the metro can be delayed. I've been caught in several instances myself, but just take a little moment to think about how we can do just a little bit better every day to get our kids on time. And then the other thing is it is the start of the school fundraisers and school auctions, and I hope everybody will sign up for the grocery stores, attend the auctions, come away with lots of good stuff, because this is the difference between a teacher's aide in your child's first grade class, or an art program, or a foreign language program, or a field trip. So, and mostly it's not just limited to the school community. So thanks.
Mr. Whedon?
Just want to make a quick plug to ensure that everyone submits their required health forms for attendance. It is a requirement in the district for every student to have a health form on file. I know there are multiple schools in my ward where a high percentage, let's say a third of students, don't have forms on file. Let's make sure our schools and our children are healthy. And also just a shout out, hope to see everyone at Eastern's homecoming this weekend.
Hearing no further, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Ms. Lord. Is there a second? Second. Second by Ms. Williams. All in favor? Aye. We stand adjourned.